he always sat alone. Every break, in the same place, near the window at the far end of the school cafeteria. While other kids laughed, shouted, traded snacks, and talked over each other, he stayed quiet, staring through the glass at the gray sky outside. Sometimes he pretended to read. Sometimes he just turned an empty juice box in his hands. His name was Lucas Reed, but at school, almost no one ever said it. He was the boy people didn't notice. Not because he was strange or rude, he wasn't. He was simply quiet. Too quiet for a world where you had to be loud to exist. That was the day she noticed him. Emily Carter was carrying her lunch tray when she saw him. Thin, slightly hunched, dark hair falling over his forehead. He sat so still he almost looked like part of the furniture, as if, when no one looked at him, he disappeared. She stopped. "Do you always sit here?" she asked, surprising herself. He looked up. There was surprise in his eyes, and something else. Caution. He nodded. Emily sat down across from him without asking. She opened her lunchbox and took out her sandwich. "Did you eat?" she asked, even though the answer was obvious. He shook his head. So she slid the sandwich toward him. "Take it," she said simply. "I have more." He stared at the food as the food were something far more important than lunch, as if she were offering him permission to stay. "I can't," he said quietly. "You can," she replied. "I'm sharing." And just like that, something began. Something no one else noticed. From that day on, Emily sat with him almost every break. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. She told him about school, about boring tests, about how she wanted to see the ocean someday. He listened, always listened. Sometimes he answered with a few words. Sometimes he just smiled, a small, careful smile that made her feel warm inside. She never asked questions. Why he was always alone. Why he never had lunch. Why he never laughed out loud like the others. She just stayed. One afternoon, when they were sitting together after class, she said, "You don't have to be alone, you know." He looked at her for a long moment, as if he were trying to memorize her face. "What if I'm used to it?" he asked. Emily shrugged. "Then I'll sit with you," she said, "until you aren't." He didn't answer, but something shifted inside him that day, something he carried with him for years. Then it ended without warning. One day, his seat by the window was empty. One break passed, then another day. Emily sat alone with 2 sandwiches, watching the door, waiting for him to walk in, but he never did. Lucas was gone. Later, she learned his family had moved. Another city, another life. No goodbyes, no explanations, just gone. For a long time, she still looked for him in the hallways. Then she stopped. But Lucas Reed never forgot. In a new city, in a new school, in a house that didn't feel like home, he thought often about the girl who shared her lunch with him, the girl who never asked why he was alone, the girl who looked at him like he mattered. One night, lying awake in the dark, he made himself a promise. Quiet, unnecessary, but the only thing that kept him going. When he became someone, when he could, he would find her. He didn't know how. He didn't know when. He only knew this. The girl who once saved him from loneliness was the one he would spend his life looking for. He didn't get a chance to say goodbye. Everything happened too fast. Boxes, suitcases, adult voices that didn't explain anything, only decided. That day, Lucas stood in an empty room, staring at the window, knowing that nothing outside it belonged to him anymore. A different city, a different school, a different life. The new house was quiet, not comforting, just quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against his chest. His parents tried. They said things would get better. that he would adjust. But he didn't. At his new school, he was alone again, sitting apart, watching windows. Only now he knew loneliness could feel different, heavier, because before there had been her. On the hardest days, he closed his eyes and remembered the way she slid the sandwich toward him, the way she said, "I'm sharing," the way she stayed without asking questions. He didn't know where she was. He didn't know if she still went to that school. He didn't know if she remembered him at all. But he remembered her. Years passed. Childhood turned into survival. Lucas learned early that the world didn't wait. If you wanted something, you had to earn it. He studied harder than anyone else, worked longer hours, gave up everything that felt unnecessary. People called him distant, cold, ambitious. No one knew that inside, he was still the boy by the window. Success came quietly at first, then faster. He built his life piece by piece, not for money, not for status, but so he would never feel powerless again. Some nights, when the city outside his window went silent, his thoughts drifted away from work, away from numbers and plans. He thought about the future, about who he was becoming, and about her. That was the night he realized he was no longer thinking about survival. He was thinking about finding her. The girl who once chose to sit beside him when no one else did. The girl whose kindness had stayed with him longer than any place he had lived. He didn't know how long it would take. He didn't know where to begin. But he knew this. Promises made in childhood don't fade. They wait. Years passed. Lucas stopped counting them. He counted deals, numbers, progress. His life became fast, precise, carefully built. One city replaced another. One project followed the next. His name began to matter. People listened when he spoke. He was successful, wealthy, in control, and still alone. Some evenings, when the office finally emptied and the city outside his window went quiet, he felt a strange emptiness inside. Not sadness, not pain, something deeper. One night he stayed longer than usual. The glow of his laptop filled the dark room. He opened a folder he hadn't touched in years, old notes, half-forgotten memories, and suddenly he understood. He couldn't wait anymore. He started with the city, then the school. Old records, graduation lists, faded photographs where faces had blurred with time. He spent hours scrolling through pages no one had looked at in years. Her name didn't appear. He searched again, changed queries, dug deeper into archives. Sometimes it felt like he wasn't looking for a person, but a ghost, a childhood memory that had no reason to survive. He was close to giving up. Then he saw the last name, Carter. His chest tightened so sharply he forgot to breathe. The name was simple, ordinary, but he knew. Emily Carter. He stared at the screen, afraid the name would disappear. Then he searched further. Social media, public records, photos, a job, a city. The life he found wasn't what he expected. She wasn't famous. She wasn't part of the world he lived in now. Her life looked quiet, modest, real. And that pulled him in even more. He closed the laptop near dawn. Now he had a name and a direction. What he didn't know yet was that finding her would be the easy part. Seeing her again and not being recognized would change everything. He recognized her instantly. It wasn't dramatic. There was no music, no sudden pause in time. The world simply shifted, stepped slightly out of focus, and she remained. Emily Carter stood near the entrance of the cafe, holding a paper cup of coffee. The light caught her hair, turning it almost golden. She was older now, calmer, a woman who knew where she was going. And yet, in the way she tilted her head, in the way her fingers wrapped around the cup, he saw her at once. Lucas stopped. He didn't realize he had until a moment later. He was staring, afraid that if he looked away, she would disappear again, just like she had years ago. She lifted her eyes and didn't recognize him. Her gaze lingered for a brief second, long enough to notice a well-dressed man standing too close. Then she looked away, took a sip of her coffee, and stepped aside. "Sorry," she said politely. That voice. He had heard it 1,000 times in memory, but now it was deeper, steadier, unfamiliar. "It's okay," Lucas replied, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. She nodded, about to leave, and in that moment he understood. If he didn't act now, he would lose her again. Not as a boy this time, as a man. "Emily," he said, almost without thinking. She stopped. Slowly, she turned back. "Yes?" she asked. "Do we know each other?" The question hit harder than he expected. He looked at her and saw everything at once: the school cafeteria, 2 sandwiches, an empty seat by the window, and at the same time this woman standing in front of him, unaware of who he was. "We crossed paths once, a long time ago." She frowned slightly, searching her memory. "I'm sorry, I really don't remember." He nodded. "That's okay." And it almost was. They sat across from each other at a small table by the window. The conversation came easily, almost dangerously so, as if time had not passed, as if nothing had been lost. Emily talked about her work, about the city, about how she had learned to enjoy quiet mornings and strong coffee. She smiled when she spoke, relaxed, unaware of the way Lucas watched her, as if every word mattered more than it should. He listened, just like he used to. Sometimes she laughed, and in that sound he heard the girl who once slid a second sandwich across the table without asking questions, the girl who made space for him when the world felt too large. He said nothing, because he knew if he told her the truth now, she would look at him differently, with surprise, with confusion, with a past he didn't want to stand between them. He didn't want to be a memory. He wanted to be a choice. When they stood to leave, she hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "It was really nice meeting you," she said. "I'm sorry, you never told me your name." "Lucas," he replied. She repeated it softly, as if testing how it sounded. "Lucas," she said. "I hope we'll see each other again." He watched her walk away, knowing one thing with absolute certainty. The hardest part was only beginning, because he had known her his entire life, and she had just met him. He didn't rush her. Lucas knew that if he moved too fast, she would step back. Emily was not someone who ran toward attention. There was something cautious in her gaze, as if she had learned long ago not to trust too easily. And yet she replied to his messages. At first, briefly, politely, then a little warmer, then with smiles he could almost feel through the screen. They began seeing each other more often. Not dates, at least that was how he explained it to himself, just walks, coffee, conversations. He didn't make grand gestures. He didn't push. He didn't promise anything. He was simply there. When she was tired, he walked beside her in silence. When she doubted herself, he listened instead of persuading. When she talked about work, about difficult days, about the moments when she felt lost, he didn't interrupt. He accepted her exactly as she was. Sometimes she caught herself breathing easier when he was near. "You're strange," she said once, smiling. "In a good way." He smiled back. "Is that a compliment?" "For you," she said, "yes." She laughed, and in that sound he saw the school cafeteria again. 2 plastic trays, her hands, her voice. And once more he forced himself not to say too much, because the truth was waiting. The evening slowed everything down. They stood beneath the city lights, the noise around them fading into the background. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The pause between them felt heavier than words. Emily looked at him carefully, as if weighing something she couldn't yet name. "Can I ask you something?" she said quietly. "Of course," Lucas replied. She hesitated. "Why does it feel like you're always one step ahead of me? Like you already know how this conversation will end?" His heart tightened. He could tell her. He almost did. Instead, he stayed honest in the only way he could. "I just pay attention," he said. "To you." She searched his face, trying to decide whether that was enough. "Sometimes," she admitted, "when I'm with you, I feel like I've forgotten something important, and I don't know why." Those words hurt more than rejection ever could. He realized then he was winning her heart and losing his right to the past. That night, he was alone. The city outside his window glowed softly, indifferent to the storm inside him. Lucas stood in the quiet of his apartment, one hand pressed to his forehead, trying to slow his thoughts. He had waited his entire life to find her, and now that she was here, he was afraid. Afraid that if he told her the truth, everything would collapse. Afraid that if she knew who he had been to her once, she would never look at him the same way again. He didn't want her gratitude. He didn't want her pity. He didn't want to be loved because of a memory she barely remembered. He wanted her to choose him, as he was now, as a man standing in front of her, not a shadow from her past. But the truth followed him everywhere, in the silence, in her laughter, in the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. Lucas knew one thing with painful clarity. Sooner or later, the past would find its way back to her, and when it did, he would have to face the consequences of every moment he stayed silent. She was falling in love without noticing when it began. Not suddenly, not recklessly, slowly enough that she couldn't name the moment everything changed. One day, she simply realized that a day without him felt longer than it should, that silence in her apartment pressed harder when she knew he wouldn't call. He never promised her anything, and that was why she trusted him. Around him, Emily felt softer, slower, as if life stopped demanding that she stay guarded. Lucas knew how to be present without intruding. He didn't ask questions she wasn't ready to answer. He didn't force conversations. He simply accepted her space as something natural. But the closer he became, the stronger the strange feeling grew, as if there was something else between them, something unspoken, something she didn't know, but he did. One evening, they sat together in her living room. The city lights glowed beyond the window, quiet music filling the space between them. Emily held a glass of wine but barely drank, turning it slowly in her fingers. "Can I ask you something strange?" she said at last. Lucas felt his body tense, though he tried not to show it. "Of course." "Have you ever hidden something important from someone?" she asked softly. "Because you were afraid of losing them?" He looked at her too closely. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged, uncertain herself. "Sometimes when I'm with you, it feels like you look at me differently, like you already know me." The words hung in the air. He felt the past move closer, felt it press against him, waiting. "You talk more than you realize," he said after a moment. "People don't notice how much they reveal." She nodded, but her eyes stayed cautious. "Maybe," she said quietly. It scares me sometimes." Those words stayed with him long after the night ended, and he knew this was no longer just about silence. It was about what silence was turning into. Lucas sat alone long after she fell asleep. The apartment was quiet, but his thoughts were loud. Too loud. They pulled him backward, into a past he had spent years building his life around, and now feared might destroy it. He had imagined this moment so many times, finding her, being near her, hearing her laugh again. What he had never imagined was how much it would hurt to stay silent. He remembered the cafeteria, the cheap plastic tables, the way she had placed her lunch in front of him without asking questions. He remembered how small she had looked back then, and how strong. Back then, she had saved him without knowing it. Now he was lying to her every single day, not with words, but with omission. He told himself it was protection, that she deserved to love him as he was now, not because of something he had been before, that if she knew the truth too soon, everything between them would collapse under the weight of memory. Still, fear crept in. What if someone else told her first? What if the past reached her before he did? Lucas stood and walked to the window. The city stretched endlessly below, alive and indifferent. Somewhere in that vastness lived the boy he once was, the one who had promised himself he would find her. He had kept that promise, but he was no longer sure what keeping it meant. Because the closer Emily came to his heart, the more dangerous the truth became, and he didn't know how much longer he could hold it back. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Lucas was leaving his office when a familiar voice stopped him mid-step. Lucas Reed. He turned slowly. The man standing a few feet away was someone he hadn't seen in years, but recognition came instantly. A sharp, unwanted memory from a life he thought he had left behind. They exchanged a brief, careful handshake. "I didn't expect to see you here," the man said, his eyes narrowing with curiosity. "I heard you were doing well." Lucas forced a polite smile. "I am." The man glanced past him toward the street, then back again. "And Emily," he asked casually, "is she still around?" The name hit harder than any accusation. Lucas felt his chest tighten. "What do you mean?" he asked, though he already knew. The man tilted his head, studying him. "She doesn't know, does she?" The world seemed to slow. "She doesn't know who you are to her," the man continued quietly, "who you've been to her since she was a kid." Lucas said nothing. Silence was answer enough. The man let out a low breath. "That's dangerous, Lucas. Secrets like that don't stay buried." As he walked away, Lucas remained frozen in place. For the first time, the truth no longer felt like something he controlled. It was no longer just his story to tell. And somewhere behind him, in a life he had built so carefully, the past had begun to move, closer to Emily than he ever wanted it to be. She learned the truth without warning. There was no dramatic pause, no careful preparation, and not his voice. Emily was standing near the cafe entrance, waiting for Lucas, watching people pass by, when someone said her name. "Emily?" She turned. The man looked vaguely familiar, not his face, but the feeling he carried, like something unfinished from another life. "You probably don't remember me," he said carefully. "That's understandable. It was a long time ago." Her brow furrowed. "I'm sorry, do we know each other?" He hesitated, then nodded slightly. "I know Lucas," he said, "from years ago." Her heart tightened. "And?" she asked. He studied her, as if deciding how much damage his next words might cause. "You don't know, do you?" he said quietly. "Know what?" The pause between them became dangerous. "Who he is to you," the man continued, "and who you were to him long before you met again." The world seemed to tilt. "What are you talking about?" Emily whispered. "He was a boy, lonely, lost, and there was a girl who shared her lunch with him every day in a school cafeteria. A cold sensation crept up her spine. "That's impossible," she said. "His name is Lucas Reed," the man went on, "and he spent his life looking for you." In that moment, Emily knew this wasn't a misunderstanding. It was the truth. The truth didn't come gently. It never does. Emily heard his name spoken by someone else, casually, without meaning to hurt her. A name she had never connected to the man standing in front of her. Lucas Reed. The world shifted. She looked at him again, really looked, at the way his jaw tightened, at the silence he didn't break, at the eyes that suddenly carried too much history. "You knew me," she said quietly. Her voice didn't shake. That scared her more. "Before I knew you." He didn't deny it. The air between them felt heavy, unbearable. "How long?" she asked. "Since the beginning," he answered. Every moment replayed in her mind, his patience, his care, the way he always seemed one step ahead of her pain. It wasn't romance anymore. It was something deeper and sharper. "You let me fall in love," she whispered, "and you never gave me the choice." She stepped back. Lucas reached for her, then stopped himself. "I was afraid you'd see the past instead of me." Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "You should have trusted me," she said. Then she turned away, leaving him standing there, with the truth finally spoken, and the fear he had tried to avoid now fully alive. She stood alone for a long time. The city around her moved on. Cars passed, people talked, lights changed, but Emily felt as if everything inside her had gone still. Memories returned quietly, one by one. The cafeteria, the plastic table, 2 sandwiches instead of 1, a boy who never smiled, except when she sat next to him. She remembered the way he listened, the way he never rushed her, the way he looked at her like she was enough, even back then. It hadn't been a coincidence. It hadn't been a game. He hadn't searched for her out of obsession or pride. He had searched because he had loved her before he even knew what love was. Emily closed her eyes. For the first time, she understood the truth he had been carrying alone all these years. Some people fall in love once. Others spend their whole lives returning to the place where it began. And somewhere, not far away, Lucas was waiting, not knowing if the girl who once saved him would come back to him now, but hoping, just like he always had. Sometimes the past doesn't return loudly. It doesn't accuse. It doesn't demand answers. Sometimes it comes back as a decal, a folded napkin, a glass of water placed too carefully on the table, the quiet of a cafe in the middle of an ordinary day. Emily sat by the window, barely touching her food. Outside, the city moved as it always did, people walking, cars passing, life continuing without pause. But inside her, something shifted. A memory found its way back. The school cafeteria, too bright, too loud, and a boy sitting alone by the window, his eyes always lowered. She remembered how she used to slide her lunch toward him as if it were nothing special, how he would hesitate, how he would take it carefully, as though afraid it might disappear. She remembered that she had never asked why he was alone, and that he had never asked why she stayed. Tears filled her eyes, not from pain, but from clarity. Everything made sense now. His silences, his patience, the way he always knew when she needed space, the way he looked at her as if she mattered, long before she believed she did. He hadn't followed her out of obsession. He hadn't searched for her out of pride. He had loved her before he even understood what love was. Emily stood up suddenly, the chair scraping softly against the floor. She left money on the table and walked outside, her heart beating faster with every step. Some stories don't end where you expect them to. Some begin again exactly where they started. He was there, not because he expected her to come, not because he waited with hope, just because he always ended up near her, even now. They stood facing each other in the open air, the city soft around them, lights blurred in the distance. Lucas didn't move closer. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't try to explain himself again. He simply looked at her. And in that look, there was no fear left, only truth. Emily stepped forward first. "You always ate so slowly," she said quietly. A small smile trembled on her lips. "Even back then." His breath caught, just for a second. "You always shared, even when you didn't have much." That was all. No apologies, no promises, no grand declarations. She placed her hand on his chest, feeling his heartbeat, steady, real. "I remember now," she said. "Not everything, but enough." Lucas nodded, as if that was all he had ever hoped for. They didn't kiss, they didn't need to. Some love stories don't end with fireworks. They end with two people choosing each other, not because of the past, but because the past led them here. And this time, neither of them was alone.
I love these moments with you.
Me too. It's perfect.
Kiss me.